So in our last video, we used the network usage KPI to look at calls that failed to be set up with some pretty nasty termination codes. You may recall that we looked at a couple of calls that ended with they failed to set up because services were not available. Now in this one, however, though, we're looking at the Signaling Delay KPI. Now as the name suggests, these are delays, whether in call setup or call teardown, where the ending, we'll say the ending message to disconnect the call or to set up the media flow for a call really didn't occur on time. Now, to really illustrate that point, we'll take voice as an example, and let's take a look at this aspect here, which is excessive post-dial delay. Now, a cool thing here is that we can hover our mouse over this little area of text and get a description for this. But basically what this boils down to, for this specific one that we're going to use, is that this is like when somebody in site A calls somebody in site B. Somebody in site B picks up the phone, and then there's about a, say, 15-second delay where nothing really happens. In fact, if you've used something like Link or another soft phone type client before, sometimes it looks like the call just says connecting, connecting, connecting. There's no ring back, and there's no timer for the call. It hasn't really set up yet, but then finally it connects after a long time, and both users kind of end with, oh, that was weird. In fact, more often than not, some users will just disconnect and try to call back and get connected much quicker. Now, those types of reports are obviously very frustrating, but really, overall, how UCD sees that is that's unusual behavior for a call, especially for, well, a SIP-based call, since that's what it's for. So those instances are considered events where there was either post-dial, meaning that the user dialed and it took a long time to connect, or post-call disconnect delay, which is where maybe the call is hung up by both sides, but for some reason the session or SBC or the system keeps it alive well past the length of time. And that's actually pretty dangerous because that can be something where an SBC is keeping a channel open between the service provider and itself, and suddenly channels are unavailable. So that can be a dangerous instance right there. But going back to things, we'll use our very first aspect we're looking at here as an example. Now, of course, like before, we have 5-minute windows, day windows, and monthly windows. And so what I'm going to do here with this row of data is I'm going to take our mouse and we'll just hit the notebook icon yet again to view the history table. And we'll just cut right to the chase here. I'm going to go to the 30-day window. And I'm going to click this column here, percent of total count, but I'm going to click it twice because that way it sorts descending, and we see the row of data at the very top here with the worst numbers possible. So unlike before, we did a lookup based off of termination reason, and that's because we were really looking for calls that ended with a poor termination timer. But that may not always be the case for calls here. They may very well have normal termination codes, except the dial or disconnect was just overly delayed. So in this case, instead of using termination reason, we're going to say session endpoint. And then because we're doing a query based off of some delay, we can see the event type. Well, everything else is autofilled, but then again, too, the event type is autofilled for us to post-dial delay and request delay. So we say submit, since we have everything we need there. And then just like that, and like before, we now have a listing of all calls that actually had some kind of post or pre-connect dialing delay for the environment. Now, a word before we close here, and this is where this actually relates back to when looking for calls that are maybe traversing across an SBC, where both users, whether internal or external, or vice versa, with one internal and one external, have hung up, the channel stays open over an SBC. Now recall too that can lead to something like channels being taken up and calls being basically blocked or turned down by either the SBC because there's no available channels, or by the service provider if they have no open channels for them. Now in those types of instances, if you see a lot of SVP keep alive timer expired, take a look at the duration. Now the max monitoring window for a call is about 4 hours in UCD, and because these are going for 4 hours, this termination reason actually doesn't mean that the call terminated. It means that UCD basically ran out of time to continue monitoring on this call. So if that is occurring a lot in the environment, it might be good to take a look more in depth at the SBC and the service provider to see if channels are staying open, because this can actually be a dead giveaway for that specifically. But looking down here too, we can see that we definitely have some kind of dialing delay going on here. We could drill down further by either taking a PCAP at this or looking for other sessions and doing further investigation with users or on the SBC for open channels. But all in all, basically, if we're monitoring on SIP, this is really our go-to for looking at that post and pre-connection dial delay.